Hey everyone, welcome to Studio Z. So today I'm going to show you how to perform routine maintenance on your Shapeoko 5 Pro or any other machine out there that uses linear bearings and ball screws. Specifically, I'm going to show you how to grease the linear bearings, how to grease the ball screws, and how to look after the linear rails to make sure that there's no problems with them and could cause issues down the line. I'm also going to show you how to look for, let's say, some potential loose ends that could cause issues while you're trying to carve. All right, so first let's dive into what you're going to need to perform the maintenance on the machine. First off, you're going to need to go out and get, if you don't have one, a grease gun. And this is a mini grease gun with a lever action, and it takes 3-ounce cartridges as such. And I would get it, most of them have a rigid tube that comes out of it. You don't want that. You're going to want to get a flexible hose so that you can get into tight areas. And then you're also going to want to get, come on, here we go. So you're going to want to get a needle nose tip like such. I happen to pick this up from Tractor Supply. You can get them on Amazon as well. And it has the grease fitting on it, the Zerk fitting that'll fit right into the end of the grease gun, and a very fine needle nose point tip to get into the bearing, which I'll show you in just a few minutes. So now that you've seen the gun, you're also going to need a specific grease for this procedure. And I recommend, and the company recommends, to use Super Lube. And this is a multi-purpose synthetic grease. It is made especially for the bearings on the machine. Do not use an automotive style grease. The reason being, an automotive style grease takes a much higher temperature and it requires more speed to reach that temperature to get the grease into a working consistency. And the machine will not achieve those speeds or let's say, type of heat to soften automotive grease, so it won't work. You don't want to use that, and that's why you want to use specifically this one. This also comes in 3-ounce cartridges to fit into the grease gun, so the whole system works out really well. All right, so now let me show you the components and how to grease them. All right, so now let's go over where are the bearings located on the machine. So on the Z-axis, you're going to have 4 linear bearings. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's just on that part of the Z-axis. And then on the X-axis, so behind it, you've also got another 4. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4 there. So right here alone, there's 8 bearings that have to be greased. Then on the side of the machine, on the Y-axis, you're going to find there's 2 linear bearings here, and then 2 other linear bearings on the other side as well. In addition to the linear bearings, you also have the ball screw. You have the ball screw housing as well. And you'll find there's 1 in the Z-axis, 1 in the X-axis, and then 1 each on the Y-axis as well. And then in addition to that, you have the linear rails. So on your X-axis here, you've got an upper and a lower linear rail. On your Z-axis, you're going to have, let's say, a left and a right linear rail, and then you'll have 1 linear rail on each side for your Y-axis. So now that we've seen the components of it, let me get in closer and I will show you how to grease them. Okay, so here we are zoomed in on the Z-axis, and here is one of the linear bearings right here. So at the very top of the linear bearing, this is one of my old bearings, you'll see there's a little grease port here with a little screw on it. And you're going to want to remove that screw right there. I'll do it on the machine itself so you can see it. So when you remove this little screw, that opens up the grease port inside. And from there, you'll take the grease gun with the needle nose tip on it, and you'll insert it into the top of the bearing, and you'll just squirt like 3-4 pumps of grease into there. Now mind you, this doesn't have, it's not going to click in there, it's just held in by the pressure that you apply to it, so you have to give it significant force to hold it in place so that the grease doesn't come flying back out. And then you just give it a couple of pumps, and what you'll notice is that the grease will start to come out of the seal on the side, and that's when you know to stop, you've done enough. But generally, on a brand new bearing, it'll take quite a bit to fill up the bearing, but on one that's already had grease in it, you know, 3, maybe 4 pumps is about all that you'll need to grease that bearing. And then once that's done, you just put the screw back into it. And after you've greased all 4 of the bearings on, let's say, one axis, you're then going to want to move that axis up and down a bit so that you spread the grease, you know, through the bearings, and you'll also get it on the linear rail as well. So that's how you grease one of the linear bearings. Now let me show you how to grease the ball screw housing. Okay, so this is one of the ball screws and ball screw housing that you'll find on the y-axis. The other 3 ball screws are all the same, so I just chose this one to show you. It's the easiest to get to. So on the Shapeoko 5 Pro, there are no grease fittings on the ball screw housing. And some other machines will have a grease fitting on them. If you do, that's where you will put the grease into it. But again, for the Shapeoko, they don't have it. So you'll have to manually apply the grease to the ball screw itself, and then it will work itself into the bearing past the keeper that it has here. It has it on both ends. The housing is open, so like if you get dust on this and it's not cleaned, that dust could eventually work its way into the ball screws. So it's something you're going to want to be careful with on a daily basis. If you find that you have chips everywhere, you're not going to want to blow into it because it'll push those chips in. Rather, try to remove them or even vacuum them off if you can. So again, to apply the grease, it's pretty simple. Just apply it on, on your fingertip and just work it into the shaft as such on both sides of it, going down, up and down the shaft. And then you're going to want to, as with the linear bearings, you're going to want to move the whole axis back and forth to work the grease into the ball screw housing itself and get the grease in there. And also it will continue to spread it along the shaft as well. And again, just liberally apply it. You don't want to put too much, but once you see that it's working its way in, and it will collect on these keepers on the outside of the housing, and that's fine. That's like a reservoir that will continue to grease it as it goes through usage. All right, so that's how you grease the ball screw. And now let me show you the linear rails. Okay, so now let's look at the linear rails. And this is a linear rail on the x-axis, and this is the linear rail on the z-axis. And what I want to point out, and this is the reason that I decided to make this video, is that I do believe there's a flaw, believe it or not, in the Shapeoko 5 Pro in the linear axis, specifically in the z-axis. And if you'll see on each of the linear rails on the x-axis and also on the y-axis on the sides of the machine, all of the bolt holes where the linear rail is bolted to the machine are covered, okay, in a black epoxy, and they're very smooth. And they're supposed to be flush with the surface of the linear rail. And the reason for that is because when the seal, okay, there's a little rubber seal on the linear bearing, on all the linear bearings, and when it passes over this bolt hole, if it doesn't have this black epoxy on it, the grease, oil, whatever is supposed to be in there, okay, according to Carbide 3D, the oil, as they want you to use, leaks out if this is not covered, because it's an open space to pass through the seal. And on the z-axis, it's open. There's no black epoxy in here. It's just an open bolt hole that you can stick your finger down in there. And what I noticed is that when I watched their video at first, and again, I'm not trying to call anyone out here or anything like that or point the blame on anyone, but I originally followed their maintenance video, and they tell you to put oil inside of the linear bearings. You unscrew this bolt as well, and you put oil in there. And what I found is that the oil was dripping out after a couple of days, and it ended up on my hybrid table and down the linear rails. It was making a mess under the machine. And I just thought that that was the norm, you know, and so on and so forth, until I realized, as you saw in my second to last video, that my bearings on the x-axis seized up because they were completely dry and the oil had come out of them completely. And so I did research on it and found out that, you know, linear bearings are supposed to be greased, not oiled. So that's why I wanted to make this video. But this going forward is constantly going to be a problem, because even the grease itself comes out of the linear bearing itself. And I have, you know, a lot of it coming out. So it's something on the z-axis only that I have to constantly keep checking to make sure that, you know, it's consistently oiled and that, it's consistently greased, and that, you know, I'm not losing too much grease and therefore they're going to go dry again. So just something to note that, you know, certainly, yes, you could fill these with black epoxy. You'd have to clean them out first of all the grease that's on there and scuff them up a little bit, the bolt head, and then you could fill them with black epoxy, but it has to be really smooth with the surface of the linear rail. Even the ones on my linear rail have a slight depression to them, ever so slight. You can feel them, but, you know, for the most part, I haven't noticed any real problems with that. But that is something very important, and that's the maintenance on the linear rail, is to make sure that there's no scratches, no dings or cuts in the linear rail itself, other than you can see the machining marks in there, which show up a lot on camera, but it's really, really, really smooth, you know, to the touch. So that is the most important thing, is to make sure that the rails are kept smooth. You don't want any rust built up on them. If you do, you're going to want to go over them with a really, really fine Scotch-Brite pad to polish that out, to get rid of the rust. You could, you know, use a WD-40 on it to help get the rust off and get it back to a really smooth finish like such. Otherwise, the seal is not going to work, and, you know, you'll have a short bearing life, let's put it that way. All right, so another thing to point out that I also noticed is that on the coupler here for the z-axis, let me just bring this in. Okay, so on the coupler here, I've had a real problem in the past, and I dealt with it, you know, but this is something to really pay attention to, and that is this coupler nut, which is in the housing for the stepper motor. And what I had an issue with was that this nut kept backing out. And the first time I didn't know what it was, and my z-axis was consistently off about 1/8 of an inch, because this nut would back out and there would be a play, 1/8 of an inch play in here. So every time the stepper motor would go to move, the z-axis would have a delay because it had to pick up that 1/8 of an inch gap, and then it would start to move. So all of my carvings, everything would be 1/8 of an inch off as far as the z-axis was concerned. And I finally caught it one day when it got to the point where it was noticeable and I could hear it, and I actually visually saw it, you know, going up and down. So I took it apart, I put blue thread locker on the nut itself, put it back together, waited the required amount of time for it to cure, and went through it again, used the machine, and after about a month or so, it happened again. It backed out again, and I had the same problem. This time it got even more, let's say. So the third time I would go to fix it, because again, I tried blue thread locker again, same thing, it just wouldn't hold. So finally I took it apart and I put red thread locker on it, which I know is, let's call it permanent. And so far it's been about 6 months and it has not moved. So this is definitely something, if someone else out there has had the same problem, let me know in the comments. But this has driven me crazy for a really long time, but I think I've gotten it straightened out. Again, using red thread locker to finally lock that thing in there and make sure that it doesn't move. Because I do a lot of carvings that require a lot of Z-axis movement, and I thought at one time that it was just too much, and I kind of went a little too far, whatever. But that wasn't the case. It just was something in here that wasn't right. And again, the red thread locker seems to have fixed it at this point in time. But as far as this, the missing epoxy on the linear rails, that to me is something that should be taken care of, because if you look at other machines, other high-end machines like the Shapeoko 5 Pro, all of the linear rails on the machine have the epoxy in them filling it up. And again, that is to ensure that the grease from the linear bearings does not escape past the seals, and it will then shorten the amount of time that the bearing will have. So something to really pay attention to and keep an eye on when you're performing your maintenance. And I like to look over the machine every single time that I use it. I check, make sure nothing's loose, because again, I've had too many instances, and now I check all of the couplers. I make sure I move them by hand before I turn the machine on, so I can physically feel if there's any play in them. I check all of the bearings and so on and so forth to make sure that I can spot something before it creeps up on me. And the biggest of them is something like this, because you'll be sitting here in the middle of a carve and all of a sudden something will be off and you can't figure it out. And now I know what to look for, and hopefully you do as well, in case it's something that's been nagging you. Okay, so I also wanted to point out, I don't know if I showed it well enough on camera, the reason why it's so important to have the grease gun with the needle nose tip is because there's not a lot of room behind the bearings. So when you're trying to get in there, like especially on the X-axis here, it's hard to get in there, and you want this much flexibility to be able to get into those narrow little spots behind the plate, and especially on the Y-axis. It can get a little difficult. Even under here, you have to squeeze behind the plate of the spindle to get to the lower bearing on the Z-axis. So again, really critical tool to get the job done. The most important being that needle nose tip. All right, so that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple maintenance on the machine. It's greasing the linear bearings, greasing the ball screws, the housing, as well, and keeping up on your linear rails to make sure that they're in tip-top shape, that you're not losing the grease, getting past the seals and creating an issue down the road. So I also wanted to mention that keeping an eye on the couplers that you have for the stepper motors, make sure that there's no play in those, because constant movement back and forth, things come loose, as I explained. So that's another area to keep an eye on and make sure that there's no play. So it's pretty simple. There's not not too much else to worry about, and just keeping it clean. That's obviously the biggest culprit is going to be dust and chips, that they don't get stuck in any of the ball screws and cause a jam. So with that, I hope you guys learned something from this one, and you can perform the maintenance on the machine yourself. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, a like, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really keeps the channel going. And until then, I'll see you guys on the next one.